I'm back. And at this point, before I get started with my video, first off, I really appreciate it if you would hit a like and subscribe on my video. I really would appreciate that if you would do that for me. Second of all, I realize I never have really introduced myself. I've made several videos, and for people who have seen my videos, I never have really explained exactly who I am, why I make these videos. First off, I'm of a belief that most people are a sum total of their life experiences, their environment, and the influences that they have encountered along the way. I think that's the sum total of most people in life. And so I'm no exception. And some of the things that I experienced when I was coming up are a lot of the things that I reflect on when I make these videos. And one of them being, I don't really like it when people, how can I put this? I have a problem with the way people who are supposed to be of higher moral values and integrity treat people. And I've said before in my videos about capitalism that I'm convinced that capitalism has everything to do with why people treat people the way they do. And so, even though I may make videos about different subjects, that's really the basis of where I'm coming from with it. I'm not a socialist. I don't label myself a socialist or a communist. Unfortunately, in this country, because capitalism is the number one religion in America, you can actually speak more negatively about other religions than you can capitalism. You can talk about other religions all day long, and you may not get much pushback. But once you start talking about capitalism, all of a sudden, you're the Antichrist, you're a socialist, you're a communist, you're a fascist, just, well, anyway, I'm not. That's the bottom line. And so I want to kind of, like I said, I'm kind of going to go backwards a little bit because I didn't do this at the beginning. I'm going to do it now. And I'm going to try to explain myself a little bit better as far as where I'm coming from. Years ago, when my son was, probably no more than 8 years old, we went to the airport to see off my older brother. And while we were sitting there was a pilot that was sitting there with us. Now, back then, airports weren't set up the way they are now. Everything was a lot more loose. We didn't have TSA and all that. So he was sitting there with us, I guess, waiting on he was going to board a plane too. I think the same plane for his flight. And my son saw, he had his uniform on and everything. So he asked me, says, how do planes turn when they're in the air? I said, what makes them turn? And the pilot looked at him, he says, that's a good question. I really couldn't tell you. And I thought to myself, you lying bastard. Of course you know. You couldn't have gotten out of flight school without knowing the answer to that question. What you're really saying is, you're not going to waste your time trying to explain it to my son because you think he can't comprehend your answer. That's all it was really saying. There's no way he didn't know. That's for sure. I may be speculating on why he didn't tell him, but I'm definitely not speculating on the fact that he definitely knew. He could not have become a pilot and not know how planes turn when they're in the air. So I went ahead and explained it to my son. I broke it down to him. Because one thing about me, if I know something, I met people and through my life, and that was one of the reasons why that aggravated me, because that wasn't the first time that ever happened. That happened to me personally. You know, uh, my older brother, who was extremely intelligent, he used to do that. He had all advanced subjects in school. He graduated with a scholarship. He was a computer science genius. I would ask him questions when I was younger, and he would do me the same way. Well, I can't explain it. And I'm like, bullshit. Of course you can. If you know it, you can explain it. I'm hardly the most intelligent or articulate person in the world myself. So and there's nothing that I know that I can't break down. I can not only can I break it down, but I can even break it down. If you don't understand it one way, I can break it down another way. I can break it down as many ways as you need me to break it down to get my point across. I always have been able to do that ever since I was a little kid. So and I'm not intelligent. I don't have a degree, if that's the measure of intelligence. So I always call bullshit on that when people act like they can't break something down to you that they're supposed to know. What they're really telling you is, no, I just not going to waste my breath on you. You probably couldn't comprehend it after I told you. It's really, to me, it's an insult. So anyway, I proceeded to go ahead, like I said, and tell my son how the planes turn. And then the pilot looked at us. He looked at me like, wow. He said, that was some explanation. I'm like, yeah, you could have done the same thing. If little Jimmy had been sitting here, you would have. But you saw my son and you said, no, I'm not even going to waste my breath because this is too far over his head. And so that was part of my journey. I mean, like I said, it's the things that happen along the way. And one of the things about me is I pick up patterns pretty well. And I noticed a long time ago that, and this is how this ties into capitalism, in case you're wondering. Because I worked in sales for most of my working life, and I do pick up patterns. I know what they do in business. And in business, what they do is anything that they want you to know, it's in flashing lights and a big sign with huge writing on it. Very simplistic, something to where even a child would be able to pick it up. That's the way they present things that they want you to know. On the other hand, things that they don't want you to know are in small print that's so small you practically need a magnifying glass. Well, that's not an accident. Of course it isn't. So they purposely keep information from people that they don't want them to know that could be useful to the person. And they purposely keep information back that they don't want them to know that would not be advantageous to themselves. This is across the board. Now, what does all this have to do with capitalism? I'm going to tie this together. First off, I want you to understand how it is I feel about exactly how I feel about capitalism and why I'm against it as much as I am. And bear in mind, I'm very much aware that we would not have the infrastructure we have. We would not have this country running the way it does. We wouldn't have all the opportunities, all the jobs. We wouldn't have the lifestyle. We wouldn't have any of the things that we have were it not for capitalism. Capitalism did grow this country at warp speed. I'm very much aware of that. I'm very much aware of the usefulness of capitalism and the functionality of it. I'm very much aware of that. But I'm also aware of the residual effects of capitalism. And that's what most people really don't know, because capitalists don't want us to know that. They want us to think that capitalism is a system of perfection that cannot be tampered with. That if you tamper with it, it's like tampering with nitroglycerin. You know, if you tamper with it, it's just going to blow everything up. You can't tweak it. You can't critique it. You can't do anything but just accept it just for what it is, which makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. But again, let me go back and go to an example to better explain where I'm coming from. When I was growing up, there was a story that we read when I was in school. It's called Stone Soup. A lot of people probably in this day and age probably never heard that story. It's an old story. But it was a story that allowed me to reflect, because obviously when I was a little kid and I heard this story, I was in kindergarten or wherever I was, first grade, wherever. I didn't even know what capitalism was. But I don't forget. And when something else comes along, I can reflect and I make a connection. And I don't know how other people's thinking patterns go. That's the way mine goes. And so anyway, in the story of Stone Soup, it starts off with this village, this guy, there's nothing to eat. There's basically nothing to eat. And people are wondering what they're going to do. And this guy he builds a fire. He puts a pretty good sized pot over top of it. He pours water in it. He puts a stone in it. And this person's watching him and everything. And he's like, "What are you doing?" He said, "Well, I'm getting ready to make stone soup." And so the water comes to a boil and they get a ladle and taste it. And he says, "Man, it's rather bland. It's supposed to be soup." He's like, "Well, you know what?" He said, so this other guy says, "I got an idea." He said, "I've got some celery at home." He said, "I think I'll throw that in there. See what that'll help." He said, "Yeah." So they go get the celery and throw it in there. And somebody else says, "Well, I got some carrots. I think I'll throw some carrots in there. That might go good with the celery and help with the flavor." And so then somebody else has some potatoes. And so little by little, they came up with their different vegetables that they had at home in their cupboards that they weren't using, and they threw it in the pot. And then as the pot started to overflow, they put in a bigger pot. And so they had a huge pot. And they just kept adding to the pot different vegetables that they could come up with, until eventually they ended up with this huge pot of soup. And the pot of soup was so big that it basically fed the people that was in the village. Now, what's the moral of that story? Well, I don't even remember the moral of the story that they was telling when I was in school. But for me, the moral of that story is that explains capitalism. It really does. Because, someone comes up with an idea. And no matter how great that idea is, that idea does not come into fruition until other people get involved and help that idea grow into something that actually works. And that's different from a mom and pop business. A mom and pop business, most of the time, they call it mom and pop for a reason. It's because, mom or pop starts the business. The kids may help. If the kids know some other kids in the neighborhood that the parents feel good about, they may hire them to help. They never have a whole staff, maybe 2 or 3 people, 5 at the best. That's your typical mom and pop business. That's not capitalism. I mean, it is. You could say it is if you want to stretch it, But that's not the type of capitalism that we live up under in this day and age when you talk about businesses. That's a small business, small B business entrepreneur. A big B business entrepreneur or business person doesn't function that way. They have a huge staff of people that they have to rely on. They have supply chains that they have to rely on. Usually there's a structure that they usually have to lease or rent. I mean, lease or buy or build. And that changes the game. That changes everything because every time they're growing in some direction, more people have to come on board to help bring that vision into fruition, or else it won't grow. And the number one thing that's going to make it grow, obviously, is demand in sense of sales, because you're not going to grow a business that's not growing in sales. No one does that. You'd be a fool if you did. I mean, there are exceptions. Sometimes you may see some commercial property someone may build, and they have that if you build it, they will come thing to where, they don't have tenants right away, but then eventually they get the tenants after they built the commercial property. That does happen. But for the most part, most businesses start out with an idea, a vision, and then if they want it to be bigger, they have to hire people. And one of the things that they also did years ago was really clever on the part of capitalists, was they used framing in order to bamboozle people into believing that if they hire you to help them build their business, they're doing you a favor. See, it used to be when I was growing up, you saw signs that said, "Now hiring." Now the signs say, I'm sorry, I'm saying that backwards. There used to be signs that said, "Help wanted." When I was growing up, there used to be signs that said, "Help wanted." Now, if you notice, the signs say, "Now hiring" or "Hiring event." Well, the reason for that is they want to frame it differently so it doesn't suggest the fact that you're helping them. They want to make it sound like they're helping you. So now hiring means, well, now you have the chance to have a job. We're now hiring. Or a hiring event. Oh, it's an event. It means that it's only gonna last so long. You better hurry and get down there. But when the sign said "Help Wanted," there was no confusion. You knew. We all knew. Here's somebody that's hanging a sign out because they know they desperately need help, because if they don't have this help, they can't stay in business, because business is going across the street. They cannot serve all their customers. So now business has gone across the street because that's the only time they hire people. If the business is so small, just the family can run it, they don't hire people. That's the reason why I say you can't, it's silly to call them job creators. They don't hire people when the family and friends can run the business themselves. They don't hire people. They don't say "Help Wanted," and they don't say "Now hiring." They only hire people when the business grows to the point to where they can no longer handle the capacity, and now the business is going across the street because they can't serve everyone. So in order to keep that from happening, they hire more people for customer service, or to be more productive. If it's a matter of not being able to, because all of it's relative to customer service. If they can't get enough of the product out fast enough, that's customer service. If they can't, if it's something that has to be cooked, if they can't cook it fast enough, that's customer service. All those are customer service issues. If they can't get to you today, if you have to stand a long line, that's the customer service issue. All those things are things that would make someone say, "I don't have time for this. I'm in a hurry. I just thought I'd drop in real fast and get this taken care of. I see y'all can't do it, so I'm going across the street." Now they've lost business. That's the whole purpose of hiring, whatever the company is, whatever the business is. It's not about job creation. It's about needing help. And when it used to say help wanted, there was no confusion about that. But again, they use framing in order to bamboozle people into believing that, oh, well, they're helping you. So that's one of the main problems I have, one of the first problems. But then there is the other problem. And this is where it gets sticky, and this is where Christianity, the part of Christianity of this video comes in. Because the other thing that capitalism does is it teaches people to covet. What do I mean by that?